Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Felicia Antonio, and I am the Keep It On campaign manager at Access Now. Today, I have with me very able panelists who will be joining me in the discussion around internet shutdowns in Africa and what is being done in response to this growing threat to fundamental human rights and democracy on the continent. We brought together this webinar to be able to highlight what is happening in the region with regards to internet shutdowns, and also to highlight the findings of the recently launched Keep It On 2021 report as well. So I would let my panelists introduce themselves, and then I would give a brief overview of some of the findings we saw in 2021, and then open up the discussion for today. So I would start with Susan.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Felicia. Good morning, viewers. My name is Susan Mwape. I'm from Common Cause Zambia in Zambia. Thank you very much.
All right, Victor.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victor Capio from Cape Town in Kenya.
Victor, can you please speak up a bit? Your voice is low.
My name is Victor Capio from Cape Town in Kenya. Is that good?
All right, thank you. Adrienne.
Is it my turn? Hello, everyone. My name is Adrienne Wanyama, legal officer at CIPESA, or the Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. Thank you. Thank you. Atnaf.
Hi, everyone. My name is Atnaf Brahani. I'm the co-founder of CARD and also the program director. It is good to be in this panel. Thank you very much, Felicia.
Bridget.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Bridget Tandere. I am Africa Policy Analyst at Access Now, where I take care of all the work related to policy in ICT in Africa, and I also work very closely with the Keep It On campaign.
Thank you very much, all of you. You will get to know more about the speakers as they discuss the amazing work they're doing around internet shutdowns. All right, so we all know that internet shutdowns are dangerous acts of digital authoritarianism. And in 2021, Access Now and the Keep It On coalition documented at least 182 shutdown incidents across the globe. And these were intentional disruptions by authorities in various countries around the world. When you compare to 2020, when the pandemic broke out, we documented 159 shutdowns in 29 countries around that time. And so you can see that there has been a surge. And the reduction in number of shutdowns in 2020 could have been as a result of the various restrictions that governments had imposed with lockdowns. And so this meant that people could not mobilize to protest. Elections were postponed to 2021, and many other restrictions were imposed in order to curb the spread of the pandemic. And so it's sad to see that as we are getting back to normalcy, as we are gradually coming back to what we use, what I don't want to say if it's pre-pandemic, but yeah, 2020, we are seeing that governments are going back to old habits, increasingly disrupting internet access. When you come to Africa, 12 countries shut down the internet, some of which include the Republic of Congo, Eswatini, Niger, Senegal, Uganda, Zambia, and Ethiopia. And sadly, there were new countries that had not shut down the internet before that did so in 2021 in the region. And so we have seen that this is really concerning, and we want to highlight what is being done by various actors around the globe in response to disruptions. But for the purpose of this webinar, we will be looking at what is being done in Africa, as I said earlier. And so to begin with, I would call on, all right, so I want to have a chat with, first of all, with Susan, Adrian, and Atnaf with regards to what happened in Uganda, Zambia, and Ethiopia in 2021. And then we would, follow up. We would continue the discussion from there. So maybe Adrian, if you could tell us what happened in Uganda.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Once again, the online team and everybody around, glad to have you all. So what transpired in Uganda is that we, towards the lead up of the elections, about just a day, but maybe just before that, we saw a serious clampdown on online platforms, including the usage of the internet, as well as social media platforms. Of course, we had an earlier time where we had OTT tax, which was restricting access. People had to pay tax before they used social media, and that, of course, later on was replaced with the 12% levy on data, and the OTT tax was removed, but replaced with 12% levy on data. So with that, because of COVID-19, what had happened is that we were heading into the general elections, and that meant that there were serious countermeasures that had been put in place to curb the spread of the pandemic in the country. So as a means to averting probably continuous infections, there were so many restrictions, including curfews, bans on travels, bans on transport, bans on markets, most importantly on public meetings and gatherings, where all assemblies were banned and would not take place. And the advice was that all assemblies would be taken online. Unfortunately, during that time, we saw that because of the friction between government and Facebook, because Facebook had closed down a number of pages or sites belonging to government officers, government was not happy and it blocked Facebook in the country. That was the beginning. And then later on, government writes to Google, asking them to close over 14 YouTube channels that were belong to different individuals on allegations that they were publishing information that was actually affecting national security, or that was potentially jeopardizing national security. But of course, Google did not agree with government and said they needed a court order if that was to happen. So with that, the restrictions had been building up, and towards the elections, just days before elections, about 2 days, we saw, for example, government asking that, giving a directive that, for example, the internet service providers should actually block most of the VPNs that are used. So over 100 VPNs would be affected, to ensure that people would not access some of these platforms. And on the eve of the elections, of course, there was communication that went to internet service providers within the country to block access to the internet. So what happened is that there was total blockage of the internet on the eve of the elections, and this shutdown, of course, lasted about 5 days. And within those days, no activity, no person would access anything to do with the internet or even social media. Even if you had the most powerful VPN, it was actually useless because internet was completely down. And of course, you could see that I think majority of the internet service providers were always stuck and are always stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they want to continue operating in business, but at the same time, they owe certain obligations to consumers who use their services. But if they are to put interests of their consumers first, they risk revocation of licenses and loss of operation in a given country. So most times they're inclined to obeying orders from the regulators, who in this case asked them to block the internet, and there it was. We're all in darkness of information. There was no easy transfer of information. There's no easy freedom of expression, dissemination of information, or expression of opinions and speech. All those were curtailed because no one would actually get on any platform. And of course, 5 days later, with the restoration of the internet, still some platforms off. Facebook is still down and can only be accessed, I think, through the use of some VPNs. But as I noted earlier, most of the VPNs were actually blocked towards the general election. So that is what has been happening. And as I conclude on what actually transpired, we must note that this shutdown has come as part of replication of similar measures, especially in authoritarian countries or governments across the continent, because our neighbor Tanzania had just implemented a similar measure in the election that had before us, and we kind of decided to replicate that particular measure to shut down the internet. And we must also note that this internet shutdown went really to the root of the credibility of the election, to the extent that there was suspicion and people were wondering what was happening and why exactly was the internet blocked, to stop people from getting first-time information about what is going on at polling stations, and also what was developing as elections went on. So in brief, that is what transpired in 2021 during the election. And of course, notably is that there were too many losses. Of course, business was affected, online business, financial transactions, banking, online transport. Those who have those applications like Safe Border applications, Ubers, getting taxi to take you here and there. Innovation was, of course, also suffered a lot because there was no internet. Trade and business, of course, was majorly affected as there was no medium of communication. So that is what transpired in 2021 in brief. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And yeah, what transpired in Uganda kind of gives a picture of what internet shutdowns do to people. And so Susan, yeah, you also unfortunately experienced a shutdown around elections in Zambia. So could you tell us what happened?
Thank you very much, Felicia. Listening to Uganda is almost like a replay of what happened in Zambia, very similar circumstances. Sometime in April 2021, the country, the government then introduced 3 cyber laws amidst large protests from civil society and human rights defenders who felt that these laws were just aimed at policing cyberspace, gagging freedom of expression, especially based on the backdrop of about 7 people who had been arrested in 2020 for allegedly defaming the president using cyberspace and social media. So from there, as soon as the introduction of the cyber laws happened, we knew that to a large extent, those laws were aimed at dealing with people who would be working around the election space. And that created a serious challenge. So in preparation for that, we trained a number of non-state actors targeting civil society, the media, people from community radio stations and citizens who are more or less frontline defenders and social media influencers on the use of virtual private networks and how they could use circumvention tools in the event of a shutdown. But then in the build up to the election period, through the Keep It On campaign, we wrote to the president asking that they keep the internet on before, during, and after elections. And as soon as that open letter went out, the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Information immediately took to the media, accused us of being alarmist, that government had no intention of shutting down the internet, and that anyone who was suggesting that that would happen was actually just trying to alarm the nation. In any case, on 12th August, which was the election day, the internet was shut down. So we had a partial shutdown, which targeted largely social media platforms such as Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter were partially shut down. And we had trained people on use of circumvention too, so they were able to access the internet and share VPNs. But we also noted that a number of VPNs were also being shut down, because as the shutdown was happening gradually, people were still sharing these VPNs online. So most of the ones that were shared online were also blocked. So some people could not access the internet. And those who had access had multiple VPNs. So when one gets shut down, they would switch to another one and still manage to communicate. We also found that on election day, a lot of people in Zambia use WhatsApp. Most of the community radio stations use WhatsApp to transmit their sound bites and video clips of the happenings. And on that day, a number of things happened that were quite unprecedented in Zambia. For example, 2 people were killed on election day, and that information was shared by people who were in those polling stations. But then before election day, on the 10th of August, the same PS who had said that those suggesting that there would be a shutdown were alarming people came back and said that if people did not behave themselves on election day, they would shut down the internet. And so when it happened, we were not surprised at all, because we felt that this was something that was premeditated long before election day. The fact that they had passed these laws amidst a lot of protest, because they had a lot of draconian clauses that looked at gagging, freedom of expression, policing the cyberspace, trying to tell people how they could function, especially with the shrinking cyberspace that was occurring, because our elections happened at a very unique time in the middle of COVID. And that was right after the worst hit of COVID in Zambia had happened. So there were no public rallies. Political parties were using cyberspace to campaign. Civil society was using cyberspace to get more people to participate in the elections and all. So the space had already shrunk in terms of physically, but now they were coming to police the cyberspace. Another thing that we observed was also the fact that sometimes the internet was working fine. We just started experiencing a lot of load shedding or electricity blackouts in many areas. So you'd find that when there's a big campaign that's being streamed live by opposition parties, there would either be a shutdown or the internet would be extremely slow. But when the then ruling party was running its campaigns, everything would work perfectly fine. So we saw that there were a number of strategies that were used even prior to the partial shutdown that we observed on election day. That was generally the situation in Zambia.
Thank you very much. I think what the lesson we'll pick from here is that you must always be prepared, because for it to even actually take the government to say that we would not shut down the internet, and then on elections they turn around to do it. As civil society, you just have to be prepared and make sure that you are ready to respond or to come back online when your government decides to mislead you and end up violating your rights. Atnaf, for you, the shutdown in Ethiopia is not election related, but we've had incidents of shutdowns happening in Ethiopia before. And this particular shutdown started in 2020. So maybe if you could speak to what is happening in Tigray, and maybe if there are any other shutdowns you'd want to bring up to talk about, that would be great.
Sure, Felicia, thank you. So the context is a bit different in Ethiopia. So since the conflict erupts in Tigray region in 2020 November, there is a communication blackout imposed in Tigray region. Still, the blackout is still continuing. So it's not only the internet, actually, other communication services are also limited in Tigray region. While last June, when the conflict spread to the southern, which affects especially Amhara and Afar. So in every conflict areas, there was a communication as well as in general internet. There was internet shutdown. So I think the major part of the shutdown was in relation to the conflict. While the rebel groups approach to the center, which is they were almost 200 kilometers away from Addis Ababa last year around December and November. So also the internet shutdown affects those rebel-controlled areas, and millions of people were out of communication. When the election conducted, we were somehow afraid and somehow prepared for internet shutdown. Fortunately, there was no any communication shutdown during the election. We even conducted a consultation meeting with stakeholders, civil society organization, also with government stakeholders that has the mandate to control the communication in Ethiopia, and they even promised that there won't be any internet shutdown during election time. And they were even they even said that they were surprised to get such invitation that say to prevent internet shutdown during election time. Still, the shutdown is imposed in Tigray region, and conflict parties are not giving any sign to solve the conflict anytime soon. So people are out of communication. People are not communicating with their families. Also, it is difficult even to get any kind of help that can be delivered through communication. So I think I don't see any sign that will end the communication blackout in Tigray region, as the conflicts parties are not willing to solve the conflict in a peaceful manner in the near future. That was the major incident that happened in Ethiopia last year.
Yeah, thank you so much, Atnaf. And it's really heartbreaking to see that people that are being affected by a conflict at the same time cannot access essential communication, information, be in touch with their loved ones, at least to check up on each other, and also communicate with people that are outside of the country. And of course, as Edwin said, like every other internet shutdown, the situation in Tigray, for instance, is affecting businesses, people's education, and other opportunities that people rely on the internet for. So this is really a big concern. We will come back to the impacts later in the discussion, but I want to go to Victor. We've heard about how shutdowns have happened in Uganda, Zambia, and Ethiopia. Kenya has elections in August. And before we go directly to discuss what is being done around shutdowns, could you give us a sense of just an overview of the digital rights atmosphere in the country in the lead up to the elections in August?
Thank you very much, Felicia. Well, I think for Kenya, one of the important things to note is that we have a very vibrant digital space with, I think, very high mobile and internet penetration, meaning very many people are starting to engage online on the political process. We have progressive legislation, a good constitution that allows or ensures that people can enjoy their rights freely without restrictions or undue restrictions. And also quite a huge number of people, I think almost for Facebook, let's say we are looking at around 11 million people engaging on social media platforms, and many people are on WhatsApp and other social media platforms. We have an independent judiciary and at least some progress in terms of that. However, it is important to highlight that there are still some challenges that could lead to the shrinking of the digital rights space. Of course, the key amongst is access. Not everybody is accessing internet or social media because of challenges with the infrastructure, cost of internet, and even access to smartphones and other smart devices. Digital threats on the rise. We've seen the past 2 years with COVID-19, massive uptake of digital technologies, which has also resulted in an increasing number of threats, or people being vulnerable to digital threats, including digital rights activists and human rights defenders. And I think the other thing that is important to mention in the election context is the rise of harmful or problematic content online. That is, whether it is hate speech or misinformation or disinformation, which is expected to rise during this period. We've noted various cases of coordinated inauthentic behavior on social media, and generally there are challenges for platforms to address this problematic content, at least fast enough. And also we have challenges amongst the population who are using social media to fact check content. And as a result, when disinformation spreads, it is believed the first time, and it takes a very long time for the second set of information to come back to correct the original wrong information. So those could affect the democratic space as we move towards the election. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and it's good to see that indeed Kenya has a vibrant digital rights space. So, and I don't know if it's fortunate for you. I think it's fortunately you haven't experienced a shutdown, and you've seen what is happening around you, and that gives you a leverage. You are able to learn and prepare and see how you can prevent a shutdown from happening in Kenya. So my question to you and Bridget is, what is being done on the ground? What are the authorities saying? Have there been any comments by the government to assure you that the internet will not be shut down, given what is happening around you? And also, how is the civil society organizations and groups mobilizing to push back against a potential shutdown in the country? Maybe Bridget, do you want to start, and then Victor, you can come in, or whichever way, that's fine with me.
Sure, thank you, Felicia. And as Victor has highlighted that, the digital rights space in Kenya is quite vibrant at the minute. And because of that, we are able to lend ourselves to so many conversations with CSOs, with authorities. And I know that KickToNet in specific, and Victor can speak more to that, has been quite proactive in engaging with government officials and with authorities with regard to internet shutdowns. We've also had quite a number of utterances by public officials, by government officials, including the CS Interior, who has said that they will not shut down the internet. There have also, of course, been a few concerning utterances, especially from the government spokesperson, who has mentioned at the very least, or rather alluded at the very least, to a social media shutdown. This is also quite concerning because, a lot of the organizing and capacity building and information sharing goes on the internet and on social media platforms. So they know this, and actively it is an area that they are monitoring with specific laws that have come up in the country already that might not necessarily be related to internet shutdowns, but seek to control the online space and freedom of expression in general. Other than those two people, I know that also the Chief Justice has commented on internet shutdowns and emphasized that in as much as freedom of expression is a right and it is a limitable right, the limitations to human rights have to be necessary, and they have to be proportional, and they have to be done according to the law, which is very encouraging when it comes from the Chief Justice. And she mentions that the courts will do their part in ensuring that such directives are implemented in a lawful way. So at the very least, we know that if there is a court challenge in Kenya, we might have the judiciary on our side. If we are to file something and make our arguments in a proper way, in a concise way. Other than that, I know that there's also a permanent secretary, I think the broadcasting ministry, who has mentioned that internet shutdowns should not be allowed. Quite a good number of politicians as well have talked about internet shutdowns and just their effect. And it's good to know that government officials are becoming more alive to the fact that internet shutdowns should not be implemented and that they're not of benefit to a society that exists in a digital era.
Thank you, Bridget. Victor, do you want to come?
Thank you. I think Bridget has highlighted the situation on the ground. I think what perhaps I'd just like to add is that as civil society organizations are working to consistently remaining vigilant to monitor the environment, whether as part of election observers or as within the digital rights movement, it's important to continue monitoring and also conducting especially engagement missions to policymakers to highlight these concerns. And of course, we're also preparing for different scenarios and trying to ramp up the messaging that internet shutdowns are an unacceptable measure to control freedom of expression, and that the internet must remain open, free, and secure for everybody's use. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Before we move to other strategies like how litigation is being used, there's a question that I want to ask. There's a question from a participant that wants to know more about the Uganda case. And he's asking Edwin, what international intervention did Ugandans seek?
Thank you very much for the question. Quite interesting. But as you know, maybe to start from the point that, of course, Uganda has expressed commitment to most of these international instruments, and also is legally bound to at least ensure that they follow or they observe the commitments made under the different international instruments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, among others. So as part of what we envisage or what we see that could be done, there's always a conflict between national law and municipal law and international law, or domestic law and international law. Sometimes the sovereignty doctrine comes into interplay, and it becomes very hard to hold a state so accountable for the decisions they have made. But for now, some of the emerging practices that are going on is that, one, we could make use of the Universal Periodic Review mechanism. Of course, now the recommendations are up to speed, and this is what is going to happen. Unfortunately, what we submitted much earlier, the reports on digital rights and freedoms, were before actually the internet shutdowns, but we had actually foreseen that this could happen, and could be one of the things that could emerge to ask the government, for example, of Uganda, to ensure that they observe the internationally prescribed standards in as far as recognition and enforcement of digital rights are concerned, and to, of course, to abstain from acts such as internet shutdown, because they really affect internet freedoms and people's access to information, freedom of expression. On the other hand, the East African Law Society filed a case, for example, in the East African Court of Justice, trying to see how the government of Uganda can be held accountable for the internet shutdown and the impacts it had on individuals. So one of the things we are doing is to see that we take part in this case. For example, we are working together with the Network for Public Interest Lawyers and the American Bar Association to see how, for example, organizations like CIPESA, we can put in an amicus from a professional expert's view on the consequences of internet shutdowns and so on. So this is still work in progress, and with time, we believe that the East African Court of Justice, which is, of course, the region, is, of course, international in as far as it's beyond the borders, to see the emerging things that could come out of that kind of case, and if our amicus can be taken on. So this is still work in progress, and we are working on it to see how we can actually submit the amicus to the East African Court of Justice to see what can come out of it. But also, from the other work we are doing, of course, we as CIPESA, we usually publish policy briefs, and these we usually disseminate with the international community, the special rapporteurs. We have those engagements with them, and then also other individuals and agencies. And some of what we usually front is that when, for example, they're issuing reports and interfacing with government or government representatives, to bring some of the concerns we raised to them, so that in the future, similar actions do not take place. And if at all they must take place, that at least they should follow the internationally established standards, measures, and mechanisms, and should comply and meet the minimum international standards on any restriction that may be on freedom of expression and internet. Yeah, that is where we are at as of now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Edwin. And just to also add that the Uganda elections was a priority for the Keep It On coalition. And we did engage the government. We sent open letters urging them to keep it on. Unfortunately, they did not. And we still provided tools for people to come back online when it was a partial shutdown. And it was I really felt the impacts of the Uganda shutdown in particular, because prior to the shutdown, I was in touch with a lot of partners, with exchanging information, communicating, and then the eve of the shutdown, everything just went silent from my end. I knew there was a shutdown, but I was just hoping to hear from them, and it wasn't happening until after 5 days when the shutdown was ended. And this is really a concern when governments just decide to violate the rights of their own people without giving without caring about such rights that they are supposed to be protecting. It really leaves civil society in particular very helpless. And I think that it's important for us to find and devise ways and means of pushing back against these acts of repression. Sorry, the question was from George Chacha from Peace Cohesion, which is a CBO in Kenya and a Keep It On member. All right. Since we are talking about what we can do more, Bridget, there were a number of litigation cases in relation to shutdowns in 2021 and even prior to that. So could you highlight some of these litigation cases and how useful are these for our advocacy against internet shutdowns around the world?
Yeah, thanks, Felicia. And one of the good things that came out of 2021 specifically was the uptick in the matters that were filed in various courts around the region. And Edwin has already mentioned one of them in Uganda, which was filed by the ESCJ. We also had a matter filed in Sudan. We had a matter filed in Zambia, and we also had one filed in Nigeria. The most encouraging thing of all these matters, something that is running as a running theme, is just how much the jurisprudence is now being developed around internet shutdowns, which is a really good thing to see, because then it means that there is already decided precedent for us to rely on whenever something like this happens within the region or outside the region. We see at least jurisprudence around locus standi, which is being developed as we speak, whether it's in the ECOWAS court, because this is one of the main arguments that a lot of governments will attempt to use whenever, especially CSOs, file matters like this, and they come and say these people are natural persons, so they're not actually affected by internet shutdowns, but it is now decided precedent that CSOs can file against internet shutdowns. Another thing that we are also seeing is jurisprudence being developed around the kind of remedies that are accessible to people who are affected by internet shutdowns, whether it's from the Togo case in 2020, where monetary damages were awarded to the people who were affected, or when it comes to Sudan, where you see a court issuing warrants of arrest against directors of telecom companies that refuse to restore the internet. So it's quite encouraging to see that a lot of people, whether it is CSOs and then also private citizens, becoming involved, and they're more alive to the fact that an internet shutdown affects their rights, and having declarations from regional courts such as ECOWAS that declare that the right to access the internet is intrinsically linked to the right to the freedom of expression, and so can lend to each other, and so it is a violation of human rights. It's a really it's a lovely thing to see that our courts are alive to these things, and that we are now developing new forms of interpretation when it comes to our laws, whether it's municipal laws or regional laws. We have, of course, as Edwin has mentioned, A lot of the time we are relying on international statutes and treaties. And of course, then the governments will come and say that there's a sovereign law and our national laws are superior to international laws. But it's good to see also that these international and regional blocks and regional courts and international courts are lending themselves to also the national laws and interpreting national laws as well, and relating them to the international treaties that have been signed by these countries. So overall, we are very encouraged in seeing just how much jurisprudence is being developed around the area of internet shutdowns, whether it is the type of shutdown that is being implemented, because, you know, even if you look at the Nigeria example, it was not something that one person might very easily identify as a shutdown. It was a social media platform shutdown. But then this is also now being litigated as a shutdown because it falls under the definition of a shutdown. So if the more we continue to see these cases being filed and these cases being developed and courts giving their opinions, the more we will be able to define certain things under not so much technical definitions as we have right now, but also under legal definitions. And it will definitely help in advocating against internet shutdowns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. I think you've said a lot regarding the litigation cases in the region, but I'll go to Victor. You authored a research recently that also looked at internet shutdowns in Africa, and there were some findings in relation to litigation. So could you also let us know what you saw?
Thank you very much. I'd like to just highlight over and above what Bridget has mentioned that we found, and it is important to highlight. I think it is very progressive that we are having more civil society organizations going to court and challenging these internet shutdowns as and when they occur. But I'll just focus a lot on the arguments that are being brought before courts. And I think the first, which Bridget did mention, was about the infringement of fundamental rights and freedoms, which is an important aspect that courts are starting to recognize. The other aspect that is new is on the economic impact of these shutdowns, which has also been brought before courts, that internet shutdowns, we are using internet in different ways, and the economic impact is also an important angle to raise before courts. And I think with respect to governments, we've seen governments making major two arguments. The first is that the people who are bringing these cases do not have locus standi to bring the matters before court, like Bridget had said. Either you've not exhausted local remedies, or they will look for reasons not to have parties admitted. And the other aspect is that internet shutdowns are necessary to maintain national security or public order, and therefore is a permissible limitation to freedom of expression, association, assembly, and among others. And this have been presented to courts as possible justifications for shutdowns. In terms of private sector, what we noticed was that private sector companies such as telcos and ISPs have argued that they shouldn't be held liable because they're basically enforcing or implementing their contractual obligations in line with their licensing conditions, which require them to comply with government orders. And that is also problematic. But in terms of what courts, and I think Bridget already highlighted this, in terms of highlighting the importance of internet access in quashing some of these cases and giving directions to governments. I'd just like to highlight just a few challenges that we have noted on the side of strategic litigation, which includes the aspect of costs, public interest litigation is expensive, but also there's the threat of being awarded costs if you happen to lose. There's a challenge of gathering evidence. You know that it is important to prove that a shutdown happened if it is not obvious. Invest civil society organizations or stakeholders to invest in measurement tools, and also when bringing the arguments before courts is to include experts, technical experts, because we have seen that there's a bit of a capacity gap on the side of legal counsel and also judicial officers to appreciate the technical nature of shutdowns and how they occur. So there's need to make some investments in bridging the knowledge gap on digital rights across both the bench and the bar, and also to limit the opportunities for subjective interpretation or when it comes to these cases because of limited understanding. So I think so far it is emerging that courts can play a very important role in adjudication of cases relating to internet shutdowns, but also to mention that multi-stakeholder approaches in terms of collaboration between civil society organization, private sector, and others remains important to stop this growing appetite for shutdowns across the continent. Thank you.
Great. All right, I'm going to open up to all the panelists. I think maybe Susan, if you'd want to talk about the litigation that happened in Zambia as well. And then, yeah, that would be great.
Sure. So our shutdown happened on 12th August, which was election day. And then on the 13th of August, one of the civil society organizations, Chapter 1 Foundation, got went to seek judicial review against the Zambia Information, Communication and Technology Authority. And through that, they also got an order that was more or less an injunction against ZICTA, preventing them from keeping the internet off. So through that litigation that was undertaken by Chapter 1 Foundation, the internet was restored and people were able to use the internet. And for the longest time, we could not talk about the issue of what had happened on 12th August because we were all being told it would be subjudicial for anyone to talk about it. To this day, it remains very much unclear who instructed that the internet be shut down or what it is that transpired. However, last month, there was a consent judgment that was passed on the same case. And according to that judgment, ZICTA agreed to not work outside its legal mandate, that they would not control or interrupt the flow or access to the internet. And they also agreed to inform the public of reasons for any interruptions in future. So those are the three aspects that the Zambia Information Communication Technology Authority agreed to. So we've been making efforts. I mean, as Common Cause Zambia, we've been making efforts to contact ZICTA so we can understand what happened, so we know that as we engage policymakers in our work through our coalitions and our partners, we can know who to target. That hasn't really come out well. I think on the positive side for Zambia, following the 12th August election, there was a change of government. And one of the things that stood out for us is the fact that there was an introduction of a new ministry, which is the Ministry of Technology and Science. And that ministry is now focused on issues of technology. ZICTA falls under that ambit. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the 3 cyber laws that were passed amidst a lot of protests. So we are seeing the government beginning to open the space, talking about they are ready to review the laws. That is one. And then secondly, there was a whole major issue that had transpired just before election day. The government introduced what they were calling a smart cities project, and they began to install 24-hour surveillance cameras across the city. And then one of the reviews that came out from was that we were having potential spyware through this same project, and no one has ever spoken about that since the new government came into place. So we are trying to see whether we can also engage the government on these issues, because all those issues were linked to the elections. They were also linked to the shutdowns. So we are still trying to engage different policymakers, and we really want to know who instructed and how best we can engage with that. But for pushback, we found that the litigation was very, very helpful, because a day after elections, after judiciary review was sought, on the 14th, the internet was restored.
Yeah, thanks. It's really heartwarming to see that the judiciary was very active, at least in ordering the government to end the shutdown in a country that, let's say, had first shut down the internet around elections. And the response from Chapter 1 Foundation is really one of the things we are encouraging civil society groups to increasingly do to challenge governments when it comes to these issues of human rights violations. So that is a really great example from Zambia, and there are a lot of lessons to pick from that to strengthen our advocacy as well. So thank you for highlighting that. I don't know if Aknaf, you want to talk about do you foresee a litigation case happening in Ethiopia around internet shutdowns, and how realistic would that be, if you don't mind? And sorry for putting you on the spot.
No worries, Felicia. It's an interesting question, actually. But, so I think in Kenya and Uganda, the civil society is very strong, and they are very vibrant, which is a very good thing. But the opening up here in Ethiopia, it's only starts in 2018 and 19. Also, there are many challenges. There are no vibrant civil society organizations that are planning or standing for even major causes. There are many challenges from harassment to capacity. So I don't see any litigation. I don't see any. There will be any litigation cases regarding internet shutdown in Ethiopia, because, as I said, the civil society are not that much strong. At the same time, the public perception toward internet is becoming very, very negative. As you know, internet shutdown, especially in Ethiopia, related to conflicts. In the past couple of years, you can mention the 2019 coup attempt that left the internet shut. That left us without internet for a week. Also, after the popular singer assassination in 2020, the internet shutdown continued for 23 days. And there is no warning regarding, even the public feels somehow relieved because of the shutdown, because the public only see the internet with social media. There are many people who think Facebook is the internet. So since the conversation on social media are very, very polarized, and fake news and the hate speech going on whenever there is internet shutdown, somehow the public even they encourage it. So they don't see the economic part of the internet at all. That's the major issue the major part why we are campaigning to change the public perception toward the internet. And I think you have seen the digital divide campaign recently that we launched with data for change, and you can see that there are many startups, tech startups. There are many ride-hailing companies that depends on the internet. So when there is shutdown, these companies is left with any income. So that's a major challenge. Based on NetBlocks, actually, based on NetBlocks research, whenever Ethiopia shut down the internet, it will cost the economy $4.5 million per day. And we need to tell, or we need to change the public perception that internet shutdown is actually hurting the economy in Ethiopia. So that's one of the reasons that we are campaigning against internet shutdown for years now. And the recent campaign regarding digital divide was inspired by those challenges.
Yeah, thank you for that and for your honest response. I think that you mentioned something that is really important, the public perception. I recently contributed to a BBC podcast on shutdowns, and we talked about the issue of shutdowns, and the journalist interviewed some youth in Zambia, and there were actually some that were justifying the shutdown, saying that yes, it's good the government shut down the internet because people were using it people are addicted to Facebook, and I'm like, no, it's not good for a government to shut down the internet because someone is spending time there. Who knows, maybe they are using it for their own businesses. And for some people, once they see that you are always on Facebook, Instagram, you don't have anything doing. There are people that are making money on these platforms. There are people that are promoting advocacy work, very rich social causes via the internet. And so there's no way, I don't know when or how you can ever convince me that it is right for a government to shut down the internet. It doesn't just sink well. And I think it's great that we are trying to get people to understand that when the internet is shut down, it goes beyond, aside the fact that it prevents you from accessing that platform immediately, it has other impacts. And I keep citing the shutdown that happened in Cameroon and the stories that were coming out of Cameroon when the internet shutdown happened in the Anglophone region. And there was in the work region, the youth were very, very good with ICT, using the internet for innovation to promote businesses. And when the shutdown happened, they started moving away from that particular city or region to other places where they could get the internet. And some actually went overseas and they haven't come back. They've stayed there and they are contributing to those economies when they could have built innovations in their own country. And so for us to just say that, oh, the internet is shut down, why can't you stay for 1 hour without the internet? Let me take that decision on my own. Don't rip me of that decision or assume that I want to be off the internet for 1 hour. No. I think that is something we are all advocating for, and it's important for us to have that mind or narrative driven home, so that people will get to know that, okay, it's not right for government to shut down the internet. Why would you even do that in the first place? And maybe next time we should have some government officials in some of these sessions. Hopefully they'll be willing to speak to us, and then we can counter the perception they have, and then look at how we can actually work together to make the internet and other digital platforms a safe and important space for people, rather than restricting them in the name of protecting national security. All right. For our participants watching, if you would want to ask questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat button, and we would gladly respond to them. Or if you have contributions, yeah, I can read your contributions. Unfortunately, you will not be able to speak, but please let us know if you have questions and we will respond to them. Adnav, you've already talked about the, how do you call it? The reports you recently launched with Data for Change on how internet disruptions or restrictions are kind of widening the digital divide. And this is something that is actually seen across countries and across regions. I don't know if, how do I say it? Susan and Edwin, since you are the ones that have experienced some shutdowns in your country and you've actually worked in responding to them, could you at least share with us some of the lessons you've learned as comrades in Kenya going to the polls? What do they have to do? I know you've mentioned some of them, but could you just give us some key points that they must take note of as they prepare for elections in Kenya?
Thank you very much. At least I'm grateful. One of the efforts I've seen, there's an undertaking, I think, by the US government, where they're trying to call upon a number of governments not to shut down the internet during electoral processes. But of course, I read that Kenya actually declined to sign that undertaking. But what we can do is to inform our friends that, one, now is the time to engage in a lot of advocacy work, nationally, regionally, and internationally, to aim at least bring it to the attention of government. They don't need to replicate what has happened to the countries around them. That is one. So you need to actively engage in writing policy briefs, raise awareness raising, and also calling upon government consistently, and of course gathering a lot of support from nationals to try and speak against the consequences of internet shutdown. That is one of the things we can do to ensure that these things do not happen. But also, of course, we are contributors as individuals, especially from the disinformation perspective. We are key perpetrators of the spread of disinformation, those actors. So the other thing is to ensure that on the one hand, while internet may not be shut down in the country, to ensure that there's at least a breed of people who are well equipped, who have been capacitated to tease out what is correct information or fact checking and verifying correct as distinguished from false information, so that information which is out there is not information that would cause alarm for government to take really unwantedly or wanton measures that would actually affect access to the internet and other digital platforms. So here you need to immediately try and build capacity of journalists, bloggers, online activists, especially those who are always publishing information. Some may not be known, but that is the beginning of how you can deal with some of the issues. To the extremes, we also want to inform them to prepare in advance, just in case. Of course, Kenya is more proactive and of course, a more progressively developing country. And we expect that probably at a particular point, some of these freedoms should not be unnecessarily curtailed. But at the worst of it, we also want to call upon them to prepare themselves psychologically and also economically for what could potentially happen, especially during this time, in case government, of course, raised noise and said, we foresee this, we foresee this. So otherwise, if internet is to be shut down, we want to ask our friends to prepare in advance for shock absorbers in case that comes up, to see how they can actually deal with these issues. And also tell them the moment it is shut down, they need also to embark on preparation of data and information practices from elsewhere on how they can effectively challenge the government from any future similar acts on digital platforms. Yes, that's what I can say for now. Maybe to my other colleague.
Thank you.
Yes.
I guess on our end, first of all, to talk about collaborative effort. It's always easy for government to isolate you when you work on your own. So you always have to ensure that you engage in a lot of collaborative effort with other players, not just civil society. You could also have the academia to help support your efforts. And then also be prepared all the time. So try, train, build capacity in other people so that in the event of it, it's better to be prepared than not be prepared. So you would rather train people on how to use things like virtual private networks, how to measure shutdowns. One of the things that was quite beneficial for us was the use of the ONI tool, the Open Observatory Network Interference tool. We were able to measure and know that the internet had been shut down, what type of websites had been shut down, or what virtual private networks had been shut down, because we had colleagues at Access Now train us on how to use that tool. And when we learned, we trained other people. They too were able to assess. So from time to time, even before the actual partial shutdown, days before election, when the internet extremely goes into slow mode, we were able to measure and know what was going on. So ensure that you train people, prep people, give them a chance to understand these things. And also with VPNs, always encourage them to download more than one, but also download them long before the period that you most suspect you may have a shutdown. And then also contextualize your advocacy work. So if you're going to look at the Kenyan context, and I have observed elections in Kenya before, you will have to look at the context of Kenya and how best your advocates would work. So you would then know who you would target for your work. Through that, you can also engage duty bearers so that before it happens, you begin to talk to them, to caution them against any possibility of shutdowns. And most importantly, be prepared. So in the case of Zambia, for example, when judicial review was sought by Chapter 1 Foundation, the documentation had long been done. So again, better to be prepared than not. So if there's any documentation you require, should you need to take the matter to court, start preparing it beforehand so that should the opportunity arise, you then just edit and include a few things, and then you don't have to do a lot of research, which takes a lot of time, look for information, which takes a lot of time, look for people who are going to help to file into the court. It also takes a lot of time. So when you have all these things at hand, it's very easy for you to work on ensuring that you get all your matters restored. Otherwise, for us in Zambia, we got a lot of support from the Keep It On network. When we did our open letter, for example, we got signatures from all around the world. So when we spoke, we had that authority to say, look, this is not a good thing. Do not do it. Look at all these people that are also saying that are in support of us not shutting down the internet for any reasons. So that gave us not just the local strengths where people would isolate us and say, oh, you people are always working in the area of advocacy, you don't do so, you are always criticizing the government, but having other voices made it much, much more serious. I think those are some of the lessons that we learned. Those are some of the proposals and suggestions we'd give to our colleagues who are doing this type of work. And Kenya, we wish you the best of luck. Keep mobilizing. We are here to support you. The Keep It On network and family is very kind, and they are always very helpful in this kind of thing. It makes all the difference, believe me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I wish there was a government representative from Kenya to hear these words from Susan and Edwin and everyone else on this panel and keep it on during the elections. All right, we are almost running out of time, and I want to just open the conversation for your, should I say, final words, even though I don't want the session to end. But yeah, I would go around the table, even though I cannot see a table, for your final thoughts before I highlight just some main things that we've said or things we should leave here and keep in mind, and those watching us to also take note of them as we all work together to end internet shutdowns around the world. So I would start with Victor. Could you tell us or give us your final words? And yeah, so Victor, you go first.
Well, thank you very much. I take solace in the words of Edwin and Susan in terms of how we need to start preparing and acting, and it is good guidance to start mobilizing around and to working to ensure that we are able to organize ourselves, to continue monitoring, to be vigilant, to prepare for any scenario, and have our responses ready, so that then we are prepared if and when, if it happens, and if it doesn't, then we say we have been successful. So thank you very much, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you. All right, I'll move to Bridget.
Thanks, Felicia. And I very much echo what Victor has said. We will definitely take on board, especially what Edwin and Susan has said, and even the learnings that Atnaf has mentioned, because I mean, it's such an important part of our advocacy at the end of the day to make people aware and to educate people, because at the core of our advocacy is an informed population. And so for as long as we have people who know what the real impact of shutdowns is, and it's not just, as Atnaf has mentioned, a social media blackout or just people being off the internet for an hour or two, and why is it such a big deal? So showing people why it is a big deal is a really important part of our advocacy, to make this campaign as user-centric as possible, so that we're not just talking to the decision makers, but we're talking to the people that these decisions affect on a daily basis, on their day-to-day lives. And so that's we're definitely going to take the learnings from this this table, this virtual table, to account whenever we're doing our advocacy. And thank you all so much for listening, and thank you for having us.
All right, great final words. Okay, let's move to Atnaf.
Thank you, Felicia. As everyone I think knows, the past 4 years hasn't been perfect for all Ethiopians, with all the political changes, the conflict, the civil war, and so on. We have been going through a lot. Despite all those challenges, there are also some good signs, like the opening of the telecom sector is one of the good signs that might deliver good opportunity for citizens of Ethiopians in regards to access to the internet. So, but also the more internet is accessible, also there are some challenges. The digital literacy rate is very low in Ethiopia, and that is contributing for the conflict to the conflict underground. So there are many stakeholders should work on digital literacy, increasing the digital literacy here in Ethiopia. Also changing the public perception toward the internet. Internet is not a luxury anymore. Many companies, many lives are depends on the internet at this moment. The blackout in Tigray region, at the communication blackout in Tigray region at this moment are affecting millions of people. So it is the longest internet shutdown I can't remember actually in the world. So I think the very important thing is that we should all work on delivering access to the internet to the citizens. Also, all conflict parties that are participated in this conflict for the last 18 months should come to their senses and solve the conflict in peace, so that people can get basic rights. So I think that is my final remark, Felicia. Thank you for having me in this panel.
Thank you, Atnaf. Okay, Adrian.
I want to say, first of all, thank you very much. But in my concluding remarks, I want to state, because everybody has said almost everything, but I want to speak specifically on collaborative digital rights litigation. As my colleague mentioned earlier, is that once you are alone, you can easily be overcome or overpowered. But when you're very many, even if you have smaller voices, you can make a stronger case and a point on which you can pull the attention of the concerned governments or agencies or stakeholders to listen to you. In part of our work, we've also seen that there are quite a number of lessons we can draw from, for example, in Sudan, it may not have been collaborative, but you see, when you choose to go litigation with well-planned cases and with joint strength, you can be listened to more and you can bring about change. So I want to encourage our colleagues here that while the internet shutdowns on the increase, in some countries it may not be total shutdowns, but you'll see probably throttling, as someone talked of slowing down of the internet, and also in some aspects might be partial. So we need to work together to ensure that we challenge some of these actions so that in the future they can stop for good. So we must engage in collaborative digital rights litigation, for example, bringing in the art of working together and taking on the different measures like planning, bringing different experts together, doing serious research, and also knowing how we approach the courts and how we must communicate our cases to ensure that we are quite progressive. So as I also conclude, I must also inform our colleagues that these things, as governments increasingly become authoritative in nature on the continent, the internet shutdowns and curtailment of digital rights and freedoms is likely to increase. So the best we can do is to ensure that we garner our efforts consistently at the international level, let's make use of the international platforms like the Universal Periodic Review, the special rapporteurs. We can also make use of the different committees that work on human rights at the UN level, and also bring these issues to their attention to ensure that that they receive the publicity they need, and also to ensure that they call on governments to protect and promote the rights of citizens. And then finally, what I want to state on that is that when you're filing cases, please do not let it not stay within the country. Approach the different organizations, even from different jurisdictions and countries, and then we see how we can work together to front the cause, to ensure that it has international attention, not only from recognized international agencies, but from similar society organizations and individuals who are affected by similar issues on the continent. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your touching contribution to the discussion, as well as your final words, which I think are very encouraging and will keep us going as we continue this fight. All right, we have a few minutes to end the session, and I just want to go over some of the highlights. Okay, so what runs through the discussion is that we need to be prepared, and I cannot overemphasize this. Let's be prepared. If a shutdown happens, we are ready. If it doesn't happen, great work, we are happy. And then, of course, we would acknowledge the government's respect for our fundamental human rights. But you need to be prepared for anything. Collaboration, it runs through, and Adrian has ended with that again. And so, of course, we need to work together, and let's continue to mobilize, let's continue to reach out to each other, to share experiences, to ask questions, and share resources. And I think one of my recently learned favorite quotes about collaboration is that is by Helen Keller. And it says, alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. And so let's continue to work together. And this is what the Keep It On Coalition is here for. We provide support, and we are always happy to support in fighting internet shutdowns at any point. So let's continue to do that. Monitoring and documentation of shutdowns is key because we need this evidence when we go to court. We need to provide evidence of what we are saying. And because, as Victor said, for instance, there's a need for capacity building among the judiciary, for instance, to really understand the issue and the concept of internet shutdowns. And so we need to have all this information put together to be able to explain exactly what we are talking about when we approach the bench. The private sector should be held liable because most of the time they are the ones that switch off the internet, or they receive the orders and they decide to cooperate with them. So we need them to do more. We need them to start pushing back and saying no to internet shutdowns. Internet shutdowns have devastating impacts on human rights and cannot be justified at any point. And so we are in a good fight, or we are fighting a good fight. Let's be proud of that and continue to do that confidently. While we mobilize and push back, of course, there are a lot of challenges we continue to face. And I think some of the challenges are what are keeping us moving, because we want to get to the end. And so they're actually motivations for us. But then, of course, we need to work together to, for instance, build the capacity of general public to understand the issue of internet shutdowns and why it's important for them to be part of this conversation. So in short, Let's continue to advocate against internet shutdowns and urge authorities to keep it on, because we believe we are fighting a good cause. Thank you very much for your time, and it was great speaking with all of you. Thank you for your rich contribution, and we look forward to catching up soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Felicia. Thank you all.